What if tonight's missile launches aren't just another cycle of threats, but the instant a backed-into-a-corner regime unloads everything it has left in one last display of power? As Israeli families hustle their kids into bomb shelters and air raid sirens wail across the north, something even more alarming is taking shape in Iranian skies. The next several hours may determine whether this spirals into full-scale war or pushes the world to finally face the worst-case scenario everyone has dreaded. If your heart is pounding and you'd rather have clear answers than panic, hit that like button to show you're here for grounded analysis, hit subscribe so you don't miss a single update as this crisis develops by the minute, and pass this video along to anyone who still thinks it's nothing more than headlines. Let's be blunt about this. This is not a routine exchange. Iran did not launch one token round. It fired successive waves of ballistic missiles, keeping Israeli air defense crews engaged in a prolonged, draining battle. That shifts the mindset for everyone involved. One isolated strike is easy to wave off. A relentless barrage that pins civilians in safe rooms for hours sends a completely different signal. We're prepared to burn through our stockpile to prove our threats aren't empty. To make sense of how things reached this point, here's the background stripped of distractions. For years, Iran has backed proxy groups, pressuring Israel from several fronts, while Israel has hit back with precision operations meant to slow Iran's nuclear and missile programs. Both nations have skirted the edge of open conflict through deniable strikes, cyber attacks, and calculated responses. The cycle, though, snapped tighter after Israel struck Hezbollah positions in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Weeks before, Iran had publicly drawn a line. Strike that area and missiles would follow. Once Israel crossed it, Tehran's leadership faced a test of credibility, and they concluded their answer needed to be as visible as the violation itself. What followed caught many analysts off guard. The opening salvo of around 10 missiles fit the usual script, and Israeli defenses intercepted it without much trouble. But Iran didn't stop there. It kept firing, with new waves arriving before the last had even finished playing out. This wasn't a show for the cameras. It was a real operational campaign that left Israeli civilians sheltering underground for hours and defense teams working without a break. Why does this multi-wave detail carry so much weight? Because it transforms what could be dismissed as a diplomatic flare-up into something that feels like an open-ended war. Defense systems can manage a single incoming package easily enough. It's sustained pressure that tests their stamina, their interceptor stockpiles, and the nerves of everyone underneath them. The human cost is striking once you picture it. Parents murmuring comfort to terrified children as blasts echo outside, elderly residents struggling to reach shelters in time, social media filling with farewell messages just in case the worst happens. Even with Israel's strong interception rate, the fear is genuine, and it builds with every fresh siren. That kind of sustained strain generates political pressure no leadership can ignore. Israeli civilians weren't simply witnessing an attack, they were enduring one that wouldn't let up, and that kind of experience demands a response. While missiles were still coming down, another detail surfaced. 2 KC-135 Stratotankers and a single KC-46 Pegasus refueling aircraft lifted off from Ben Gurion Airport. Not some remote airbase, but the country's main civilian airport, in the middle of an active barrage. Tanker aircraft don't take off into conditions like that for routine reasons. Their entire purpose is giving fighter jets the extra range needed for long-haul missions. From Israeli territory, the only operations that call for that kind of support are deep penetration strikes into Iran. Consider the timing. Those tankers got airborne while sirens were still sounding and residents were told to stay in shelters. That tells you Israel's retaliation wasn't a plan for later. It was already in motion. The go-ahead had been given, Washington's preferences aside. Those aircraft were heading out to rendezvous with fighter jets already airborne or about to launch, stretching their range so they could reach their targets, circle if necessary, and make it back safely. It was Israel's quiet but unmistakable signal that restraint was over. Soon after, reports came in of anti-aircraft fire lighting up the sky over East Azerbaijan province in Iran's northwest. a region that sits directly along the natural flight path for aircraft approaching from the Mediterranean. The moment those guns opened up, it confirmed something had genuinely entered Iranian airspace. Iran's air defense network, already badly weakened from earlier operations, was now burning through what little remained in a frantic effort to track and engage incoming threats. The picture became clear. Israeli, or possibly American, aircraft were already flying over Iran while Iranian missiles were still headed toward Israel. That's escalation in its purest form. Meanwhile, Iranian state television aired footage of aging fighter jets scrambling above Tehran. F-4 Phantoms and Soviet-era MiGs, relics from an earlier era of warfare. These planes pose little real threat to modern F-35s or F-15s, and given the sanctions on spare parts, their upkeep is questionable at best. So why send them up at all? Because the government needed a show of strength. At moments of intense pressure, regimes frequently lean on visible symbols, even when the military reality tells a different story. Those jets were as much theater as defense, giving state TV something to broadcast. See, our Air Force is still in the sky, protecting the homeland. This gets at the core tension here. Iran's missile stockpile had already fallen to roughly 22% of what it held before this conflict began, and every wave launched at Israel permanently chipped away at that number. These aren't weapons easily replaced. By spending such a large share of what was left, Iran's leadership revealed its thinking. Either they judged that defending their red line politically was worth the cost, or they decided this moment justified emptying the shelves. Neither option is reassuring. On the flip side, Israel has lived under the shadow of Iran's nuclear progress for years. Intelligence assessments have repeatedly pointed to uranium enrichment approaching weapons-grade levels, with that material buried beneath mountains and inside fortified sites, forming the heart of this whole standoff. Israel has been unambiguous. It will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. Washington, meanwhile, has tried managing the situation through diplomatic channels and quiet back-channel talks, with officials at one point suggesting a deal was just days away. The multi-wave Barrage and Israel's swift response have now placed that hope under severe strain. Looking deeper, the picture is sobering. The moment those tankers launched in the middle of a barrage, it was clear Israel wasn't waiting around for perfectly choreographed diplomacy. Israel's military chief had vowed an immediate response, and the sustained Iranian assault crossed the point where domestic political pressure demanded action. That sets off a chain reaction. Iranian missiles hand Israel justification, Israeli strikes provoke a counter-response, and each cycle makes de-escalation harder while raising the odds that the entire Iran question gets settled through force. Emotionally, this is crushing for everyday people on both sides. Families brace for whatever comes next, and many want nothing to do with war at all. They worry about their cities, their livelihoods, and children growing up cut off from the world. Israelis, exhausted from decades under threat, comfort one another in shelters. Behind every launch order and every scramble call are parents, sons, and daughters who simply hope tomorrow turns out safer than today. The dwindling missile math is harsh from a doctrinal standpoint. Once a stockpile falls below a certain level, weapons stop being used to make political points and get reserved instead for genuine survival situations, and Iran seems to have crossed that threshold. Israel, meanwhile, is operating in conditions where Iranian air defenses have been largely dismantled, giving its pilots the freedom to strike with a precision that would have been unthinkable a year ago. More targets are now reachable with less risk to the aircraft involved, and that combination makes the current retaliation unusually effective. The questions keep piling up for what comes next. What will Israel actually target in the hours ahead? Nuclear facilities, missile production sites, or underground bunkers? How will Iran respond once those symbolic jets land and the scale of further losses becomes clear? Can diplomacy still function when tankers are already supporting active combat missions? Anti-aircraft fire continues inside Iran, that 22% stockpile keeps shrinking, manufacturing capacity is gone, and the uranium still sits buried under granite. None of these underlying facts have shifted, but the political room to maneuver around them has shrunk dramatically. Around the globe, leaders are watching closely. Energy markets are reacting, and allied nations are huddling for consultations. The risk of a miscalculation is real. A single missile getting through Israel's defenses could wipe out whatever diplomatic goodwill remains overnight, while an overly forceful Israeli strike could push Iran towards steps that pull other global powers into the fight. Those tankers in the air are a reminder that the clock is moving faster than any diplomat would like. If this rundown of the military signals is keeping you informed, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so these updates reach you the moment they matter most. Pass this along to at least 2 friends who'd rather have perspective than panic. Let's tie this together. The multi-wave assault reflected Iran's choice to spend scarce resources defending its image as a power. The tankers launching mid-Barrage reflected Israel's choice to respond immediately and from a distance. Scrambling those outdated jets reflected Iran's choice to project strength for its own population. And the anti-aircraft fire in the northwest was the clearest sign yet that Iranian defenses were being breached. Together, these pieces form one larger picture, a conflict that has moved well past posturing. The uranium buried beneath the mountain hasn't gone anywhere, but every missile launched brings that reckoning closer. Sooner or later, that material has to be dealt with, either through a revived agreement or through direct military action. The days ahead will show which path we're actually on. The emotional toll here is heavy. No one with any conscience wants to watch cities burn or families torn apart. Strategy, in the end, lands on real human lives. Still, brushing aside the genuine security fears felt on both sides solves absolutely nothing. Here's the honest takeaway. Israel has shown it won't absorb a sustained attack without an immediate, far-reaching response. Iran has shown it will burn through its remaining missile stocks rather than be seen as weak. The diplomatic framework that once seemed close to a breakthrough is now badly damaged, and whether it can still be rescued depends heavily on how precisely Israel selects its targets and how Iran answers back. How this chapter ends is still unwritten. The images of missile trails streaking across the sky linger, reminding us that behind every strategic calculation are real human hearts caught between fear and hope. The choice in front of all of us is to demand clarity and resist oversimplified narratives. Peace, remember, is never passive. It takes courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Whatever unfolds over the next 72 hours, the choices made today will shape the Middle East for a generation. May those choices be guided by wisdom rather than fury. May the world watch with clear, unclouded eyes. May the families huddled in shelters one day be able to tell their children that humanity chose not to let the fire consume everything. Stay with me as this story continues to unfold. The next update could land at any moment. Until then, hold tight to the facts, hold tight to compassion, and keep asking the hard questions that actually matter. The missiles may eventually stop, but the tension they exposed will linger until the deeper issues are finally confronted. That's the truth of it.